Hello, welcome to another episode of the Awakening Report. I'm your host, Doug Hamp. I have with me two returning guests. They're special guests. Very excited to have them on today. We have Gidon Ariel and Bob O'Donnell from two different sides of the world, but coming from very important theological and also political discussions that we're going to have with them. We had them on several months ago, and we talked about their book, Jubilee Now, and we're going to talk about really two topics today. One, what is happening with the Jubilee, kind of the update, which is going to involve some of the things that are happening with President Trump, as well as moving the embassy in Tel Aviv over to Jerusalem, what their perspective on that. And then we're going to talk about what Jews wish every Christian knew about Judaism. And Gidon has just come out with a new book, and so we're going to discuss those two things. So, hey guys, it's really a pleasure to have you on again.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Doug.
Yes.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so Erev Tov over there in Israel. So what time is it over there? It's evening.
Yes, and it was evening and it was morning. I think maybe that's the idea.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think God came up with that line, right? That's a good one. Yeah. So let's start with a hot topic. We'll get to what every Jew wishes every Christian knew about Judaism in just a moment. But you guys wrote a book about the Jubilee, and you were suggesting that this is the time of the Jubilee. So what's happening? Yeah, kind of show that book to us again there. All right, so there's the Jubilee Now. By the way, where can people get that book?
You just go to JubileeNowBook.com.
JubileeBook.com. Okay, fantastic. So JubileeBook.com. And kind of just remind us, what was the basic thesis of the book?
I'm going to try to get the better, one second. The correct is Jubilee-Now-Book.
Okay, Jubilee-Now-Book.com. So people can check that out. And just to remind our listeners of the basic thesis of your book.
Yes, Bob, why don't you take that over?
Okay, sure. So the book that we put out late last year talked about how people are looking at Jubilee from a couple different perspectives. And there was one line of thought that said that the previous Jewish year, 5776, was the Jubilee year. And we saw some evidence for that with regard to the Israel declaring the Golan, the land across the Jordan, as forever part of Israel. And this was the first major declaration of land across the Jordan and the first major declaration of land for the last 50 years from Israel, to say this is now fully part of Israel. So that was a very important piece of evidence. Then we had the Brexit last summer, which was a populist movement, and the idea of the United Kingdom breaking away from the European Union and some of the one world government kind of direction that the EU was taking. And that breaking away and freedom was another evidence, we said, of the Jubilee. But now as we move into this current Jewish year of 5777, we also said there was a line of thought, a line of reasoning that said that this could be the Jubilee year as well. So we were going to watch for actually this 2-year period and try to see some of the things that were happening and try to understand what God is doing and whether he is restoring the Jubilee back to us in terms of identifying for us when is this period in time, because we definitely feel like there's this period. So early in 5777, we had the Trump election, a surprising election. Regardless of what you think about Trump, you have to agree that that there was a populist movement in the United States, similar to what we saw with Brexit. Okay, so that is a third piece of evidence, if you will, that we might be in this in the Jubilee season. So, is 5777 going to be the big Jubilee year? Perhaps. What might we look for in the days ahead to understand whether 5777 is going to take the prize? Well, you know, how about if a number of countries begin to step forward and say they're going to begin moving their embassies back to Jerusalem? And the first on that list could be the United States. If the Trump administration decides to do that, then that would be a huge sign, both a blessing for our nation, but also a sign that the world is changing and that many nations are coming into stronger alignment with Israel. Another thing that the Trump administration could do is simpler, and that is just declaring Jerusalem to be the eternal capital of Israel. And they could do that with a proclamation. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they chose May 23rd, Jerusalem Day, to do that? May 23rd of 2017 will be the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem. And so that is a pivotal day. People are calling it the Jubilee for Jerusalem. So if something like that happens at the same time, then again, it could be a sign from God, yet another sign that we are in a Jubilee season.
So if he were to say that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel, he wouldn't have to necessarily move the embassy, but it would be a declaration to the world that this is what we are recognizing as the capital of Israel.
Yes, and it would have implications in the peace process because it would therefore take off the table in future negotiations this possibility of dividing Jerusalem for a two-state solution.
Let's see. Wow. And
so,
Gidon, I just want to ask Gidon, what is the sense in Israel about moving that capital? Are people happy about that? Are they anxious about it? What's the sentiment?
I think that everybody is happy about it. There might be some people who are talking relatively negatively about it because it puts Prime Minister Netanyahu in a good light, and we have a very strong opposition here. Surprise, surprise, in the media and in the opposition parties, just like you have in other democratic countries, especially in the media. So since the media is usually against the more nationalistic government, then it makes it seem that there's a lot more people who are against it. But Jerusalem has been the apple of the Jewish people's eye, where we look up into the heavens and pray about for thousands of years. It's been the Jewish people's capital for over 3,000 years. And the very name of Zionism comes from Jerusalem. Our very national anthem talks about Jerusalem. So for anybody to have anything against anything doing with Jerusalem is like mom and apple pie around here. So therefore we're looking forward to it, and I think that people are mostly just astounded at what's going on. I think, like most people, they're astounded at the big change in the United States. A real 180 has gone over there, and it's a question of how fast it's going to happen. That's all.
Well, Bob?
Well, I think that we're in a Jubilee season right now. It seems that you can just feel it, that there's change in the air, and I think we have an opportunity in America right now to take a new step forward and receive the blessing from God that would come from taking such a bold and politically difficult decision to go ahead and do what was decided in the 90s. You know, the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem was actually passed by Congress in the mid-90s. The president has simply been, every president since has just been delaying the execution of the move. So it's really a matter of just coming in line with the original decision. You know, I think it's a big it's a big opportunity. There will be many world leaders that will counsel, if you do this, you are creating war. You know, we will find ways to not partner with you financially. All those trade deals you want, Mr. Trump, you know, you can put those behind you if you offend us in the Arab world by this move. But Anyway,
Wow.
God's truth is above all that.
Amazing when you think about all these things. Just remind people, what is Jubilee? This is from Hayovel in Hebrew. And what is Yovel all about? What's the idea of that? Or what's the meaning, shall we just say?
Well,
Who
since
do you
I
want
heard
to
the word Hebrew, then I'll pick up on this. The word Yovel is, I think it's called sui generis. It's a word that the only place we have to define it from the Bible is the same places that it appears. So it sort of has to define itself. So it seems to come from the word that is used for ram's horn. Your listeners or your viewers might be familiar with the shofar, of course. And the shofar is a biblical word, but the word Yovel is also, and they are similar. I'm not a zoologist, so I don't know exactly the difference between a shofar and a Yovel. But the word Yovel appears in the story of of Mount Sinai when we heard the Yovel calling, the Yovel blowing, and when the Yovel would stop, says the scripture, then the people could go back up onto the mountain. In other words, for the duration of Ma'amad Har Sinai, for the experience of the event of Mount Sinai, people were commanded to take keep distance from the mountain. Later, so that is one aspect of Yovel. The other aspect is, of course, the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year in counting. There are seven years. The year of Shemitah, which is a stopping, just like the seventh day of the week is the Sabbath. The word Sabbath means rest. So the Bible commands us for a seventh year of rest also. And the Jubilee is the seventh series of 7 years of rest. So it's a double seventh year, as it were. So the idea of Yovel, it's the reason it is called Yovel or Jubilee in the Bible, is because a ram's horn, the Yovel, is sounded in that 50th year to set free all of the slaves. The verse in the Bible is, "You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land through all the inhabitants thereof." Some of your listeners might be familiar with that verse because it is written on the Liberty Bell of the United States, the famous symbol of the United States, which I grew up in the United States, and I learned that verse pretty early in my life because I found it fascinating. The whole idea of proclaiming liberty throughout the land. Liberty is one of the main main ideals on which the United States is built. So as a young patriotic child of the United States, I was happy to hear that idea. But when I learned that it came from the Jewish Bible, then it made a much bigger impact on me.
That's
And
Leviticus 25:10, by the way, for those who are wanting to look that up. Leviticus 25:10, and it says, "You shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you." So, yeah, good word.
So the fascinating thing, again, I highly recommend that your listeners and viewers check out our book. You can also get it as a PDF if you know what that is, because it does talk about the historical Jubilee, and it also talks about our current events. How there's a possibility that some aspect of Jubilee might be revealing itself in our times, and reasons why that might not be happening. So it's a pretty comprehensive book about from both of those perspectives, and I think it's very fascinating because from a Jewish tradition, the commandment of Jubilee might never actually have been observed ever. So by the excitement and interest that we're now having in the Jubilee, that might be a redemption of that commandment as well.
Wow. That's a good point that, a lot of these commandments that God gave, which were for freedom, which were for the good of people, were never kept. We see that time and again where they didn't keep the Sabbath, they didn't keep the feasts, they didn't do all these things. And then when God says, I can't stand your feast, he's not talking about his feast, he's talking about their feast, right? He's talking about, like, oh, I gave you some good feasts, but you didn't keep the ones I gave you. Then we see that in the days of Hezekiah, he invited some people from the north to come on down, and they all had a little fiesta together. They celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles together, and they're like, man, that was fun. Let's do that again, right? And they're all like shocked that this would be such a great time. And God's like, duh, I kept telling you that these are my feasts, these are my appointed times. They're really fun. And just kind of segue into our next topic here. This is one of those areas where I feel there's so much ignorance and there's so much animosity to anything that smacks of Judaism. But really, it's not even Judaism. It's really just Torah, okay? And, thank God for the Jews who have kept the Torah alive. Thank God for the Jews who have kept Hebrew alive. And now the rest of us can appreciate that. But, in all fairness, these are not Jewish holidays. These are God's holidays. He said these are my feasts. And yet, the average Christian thinks, well, those are for the Jews, those aren't for us. We're not into that stuff. Quit trying to Judaize me. I mean, I hear it all. And, I'm kind of stuck in the middle, right? Because I do believe in Jesus, right? But I also believe that same Jesus is the one who was intimately involved in giving us the Torah. I know you may think differently, Gidon, but from my perspective, and I suppose Bob's as well, Yeshua is, he's part of that Godhead, and so he is the one who was also there giving the Torah, etc. And so if you could kind of help our listeners, our viewers, to understand what are we missing? Why is there so much animosity? Or kind of, what we started with, what does every Jew wish that every Christian knew about Judaism and or the Torah and or the feasts, or however you want to take that?
First of all, if I could, I'd like to step back a second. As far as you took the statement that I said about Jubilee not being observed possibly ever. I don't think it's so much we did it wrong, we were only thinking about ourselves. I think it was more, if I can relate it actually to what Bob mentioned about moving the United States Embassy to Jerusalem. It's a law that the embassy must be moved. However, it has a built-in escape valve that if there's some reason why you can't do it, then just press this button and you can push it off for 6 months. That's in fact what it is over there. And I think that's what happened all throughout the years, the centuries that the Jubilee wasn't held. I think people looked at it and they say, this is very hard. I don't think we're ready for it yet. Financially, agriculturally, we're perhaps from a faith perspective, because the Bible says specifically that you're supposed to let the land lay fallow every 7th year. And then after 7 times of those 7 years, 49 years, you're supposed to let the land lay fallow once again. So the Bible says, if you're going to ask, what are we going to eat? So God says in the Bible right there, don't worry about it. I'm going to command my blessing. That's the literal translation of what it says over there. You can look it up in the Bible. It's probably right there, where near the verse that you said before. I'm going to command my blessing the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. So if you just follow my commandment to let the land lay fallow in the 7th year, you can have blessing for 3 years straight. And ostensibly, I don't think it appears there, but if you have during the Jubilee year, you can have the 6th year, the 7th year, the 8th year with the Jubilee, and the 9th year. 4 years straight of full blessing. So as far as but on the other hand, push comes to shove, put your money where your mouth is. Okay, now you're gonna take 4 years. You're gonna take a 4-year sabbatical. Yeah, let's see if you can handle that. It's not so easy, and you're talking about a national level also, and it's not only letting the land lay fallow, it's returning all the lands. It's just something that people that I think that people just weren't ready for throughout those years. So I wouldn't put it so much, even though the Bible specifically says that not following the rule of the Shemitah of the seventh year, that is a reason to go into exile specifically. But I'm trying to be a little bit more gracious to my forefathers as far as that's concerned.
And please don't take it as an attack, okay? Because I feel intimately involved with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I'm not pointing the finger. I'm pointing at the finger at all of us, right? Because humanity doesn't follow what God said to do.
Yeah. I'll tell you about Doug. We're friends on Facebook. I've been following you, and when you put a question and then you get about 100 answers, but that's something new, relatively new. It's relatively new to me, but it's new really to the Jewish people. When you say those aren't the Jewish holidays, those are God's holidays, you're right. You read it as Elohim Moadai. These are my holidays. These are my festivals. But the Jewish reading of that is, they are my festivals, you are my people, therefore they are my festivals for you, to the exclusion of others. The Jewish religion, for so many years, for various reasons, I think, has been an extremely exclusionary religion. They read the whole Bible, and I'm talking about my Jewish friends. They look at me and say, "Gidon, you're crazy. Why are you dealing with all these Christians? You got all these Jews to deal about, and there's so many Jews are in need of learning about the Torah, about learning about their own heritage, about their own what they're supposed to be doing." So I can't take everything that you said in introduction to this session at face value, but that's fair also. I also, so if I can get back to your question finally, and that is, what would Jews want Christians to know about Judaism? I think that was your question.
Yes.
I think the answer, first and foremost, has to be just let's take it easy and be open over here. In other words, let's not worry about it so much. If you ask me a question, I'm not going to disintegrate and dissipate just from the question. And if I give you an answer, then you're not going to melt like some wicked witch of the West or something like that. I don't see you, Doug. Have you disappeared?
I'm still here.
You're still there. Okay.
You're good. Yep.
And if we just say, I'm confident in who I am, I also know that I have foibles and I'm not perfect, and everybody knows that. I don't have to try to put up a face that I'm perfect or anything like that. And if we just say, hey, I as a Jew and you as a Christian, who are daring to step out and may I have this dance, like the first time that somebody meet you, say, oh, there's some enchanted evening, you see a stranger across the crowded room, and you say, may I have this dance. That's what we're doing over here, because the Jewish people and Christians have been strangers for thousands of years at best, enemies at worst. And so now we are at an opportunity where we have so many things in common, so many common interests, that we can try to focus on those common interests and start talking to each other. And if we just put aside our differences, and granted, they are tremendously big differences. I'm not saying that, we can just put them aside forever and we're just one big happy family and we'll pretend that the other person has already accepted all of the things that we have, and we're not children. We can recognize that we have differences, but it's fascinating that even in spite of these differences, there's so many people who are interested. we run an organization, I don't think you mentioned it, called RootSource, root-source.com. RootSource is an online platform for Christians and Jews to study the Torah, to study Jewish concepts, ideas, texts, and themes, and build a relationship with each other. And in spite of what so many of my unknowledgeable Jewish friends will say, well, all of those Christians, they just want to turn you into a Christian, right? It's all just, you're just there to be proselytized. In spite of what they say, I recognize all these people just want to learn more. They just want to learn me. These are people who are really putting their, well, not money where their mouth is, but their time, their efforts, their resources, their interests. I hear many, I see a lot of, pardon the expression, anti-Semites on the internet who say, but I love Jews. Yeah, okay, you said 3 words. I love Jews, and that's it. You don't have to do anything more. You can do the opposite. But these are people who are spending time. Some of them are paying to study. Anybody who wants to sends me emails, and we have interactions. We do Skype. Anything that you want to build this relationship, and the relationship is based on common decency and common respect. So that was a long introduction to get to that last sentence, because that is the answer to your question. What do we Jews, and again, it's not all Jews, only the Jews who care enough to ask this question. What do we Jews want Christians to know? We want you to know that we're just people just like you. You don't have to be afraid of us, and you have to just show us that we don't have to be afraid of you. That's it.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. Part of the Jubilee idea, and Bob, feel free to jump in here if you want. But the idea of the Jubilee, I'm beginning to see that maybe it's not just moving capitals and money and all this stuff, but what if it's a restoration of this extremely broken relationship, this hateful relationship between, again, I'm not blaming necessarily anybody here, but between Jews and Christians, for the last 2,000 years, it hasn't gone so well. Okay, let's be honest. And I think Jews were, we, the Christians, were largely to blame for the things that we did to the Jews. And what I'm kind of seeing is that there's some healing that's starting to happen. And in this zeal that Christians have had to get their Jews saved, right? We're beginning to understand, well, maybe we haven't quite figured out the whole thing. Maybe there's something that we're missing. Okay, and I think a lot of it comes down to just basic terminology. That's one of the things that I've focused on in my books a lot, is understanding the basic terms. And I think a lot of times we don't define our terms very well. And because we don't define the terms, then we start saying, well, you've got to be saved, right? Because the Bible says you've got to be saved, but we haven't really understood what does it mean to be saved, right? Or, it says, Jesus had so many things where he said that I did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, right? I came to establish them. And yet we have not properly defined our terminology. And so then any smack of Sabbath or any of this other stuff, and we think, oh, that's just for the Jews, okay? And so the reason that I said that, and again, no offense intended here, but they're not Jewish holidays. I am very appreciative that the Jews have been faithful in maintaining these things, and you've done what God said to do, whereas the Christians have said, oh, those things were nailed to the cross. All right, so I see that as a huge wedge in our two theologies. And again, I'm speaking now for the vast majority of Christians. I'm trying to, okay? My opinions have changed to some extent, right? But what I grew up hearing is that all that stuff was nailed to the cross. That was slavery. It was bondage. The stuff that God gave at Sinai was really just this difficult, onerous set of rules and regulations. And he gave that to, the meandering Jews for 1,400 years, and then Jesus came and he freed us all from that stuff. Okay, so to me, that sounds like, how could we possibly have fellowship when I think the very basis, the very core of what Judaism is, of Torah, and I think that was some terrible thing. That's going to be hard to have some fellowship. So that's where I'm finding that again, we Christians are starting to wake up and say, wait a second, maybe we misread that. So take it from there.
Yeah. Can I? Who were you
Absolutely.
directing that to?
Either one of you
Okay.
guys. Either one of you guys. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me make one comment here about the Jubilee aspect. I love it when in one of these live interviews situations that someone says something that I've never thought about before, and I have to give you a call out on this idea that one of the things God might be trying to do is related to the bringing together of Jews and non-Jews through the Jubilee. I think that's a fascinating idea. What we have noticed is that if you go back in history, go back in these 49-year increments or 50-year increments, take your pick, because it works either way, there's a pattern of things that have happened that that connect, in a way, Jews and non-Jews. For instance, in 67, when God restored the Judea and Samaria to the Jewish people, when he unified Jerusalem for the Jewish people, that was the beginning of a couple of significant, awakenings in the Christian world as well. We had the Messianic movement that really traces its roots back to 67, and there's been a sort of various charismatic renewals and sort of outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and certain Christians would identify and say that relates back to 67 as well, the Jesus movement, for instance. But your idea, the idea that God is actually using these things to bring people together, I think it's a wonderful idea. It makes a lot of sense.
I thought you were asking Bob alone, but then it sounded like you're asking both of us. I think that in the Bible also it says specifically, I'm not going to bring a verse, but it seems to me that what it's saying that the Jubilee is the great equalizer. When people have to return the lands that they acquired over the previous 50 years to their original owners, so that you never really acquire forever. You just acquire temporarily, and then and you don't really sell for forever. You sell, okay, how many years until the Jubilee? Okay, it's only 3 years until the Jubilee, so I'm really just renting this for 3 years. Okay, so it's a difference. And ultimately, everybody goes back to square one, and we're all equalized again. So I'm fascinated by the idea that this, if it's this year, last year, the next year, it's one of these years. I'm very fascinated to live in this period as well. Might really be the first Jubilee that has ever been observed in one way or another. It might be in another 50 years. You can read about that in our book. But the idea that there never has been equality, and the very idea of equality was something that it was written in the Bible, but nobody really did it all over the world. Only a couple hundred years ago, the idea of democracy, that you could lead yourself, that you could vote for people, you could vote people out of office, that you're in charge, and everybody's in charge of everybody. Where all men are created equal. That's something that is written in the Bible, but most people didn't accept until recently. And so this idea of Jews and Christians trying to figure out what's our relationship. Well, you have to have some equilibrium in a relationship. If one side of a relationship is so much higher than the other and vice versa, then that relationship can't stand. There's got to be some play over there. There's got to be some tension, but ultimately there has to be a relationship. It has to be close. So I think that this coming together again, I'm not talking about the one new man that people mention often to me. I'm talking about just let's get together, let's see who each other are, let's go on a few dates, as it were, and let's see where that leads us to. Because if we don't go on those dates, then we're never going to be able to create a serious relationship. I'm not suggesting getting married. I'm already married, so Doug, I'm sorry, but I'm of course using that as a metaphor for a significant relationship. There has been no significant relationship between our two faith communities ever, and this is something that's starting now. And again, I'm not talking about the details of which feasts the Christians are supposed to observe and which ones the Jews are going to let them observe and how that's all going to look. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about just get together, see each other as equals, and take it from there. And I think that and again, when you think about it, the Jubilee isn't the end. It's not that great Jubilee year, which might be a phrase, a synonym for the end of days. It's not meant to be the end. It's meant to be the end of a cycle and then start over again. So let us pray that this Jubilee season will be the season where we will see equality, where we will see coming together of these faith communities through personal, individual relationships of Jews and Christians, and that will set us the stage for the next period, the next era that will come afterwards.
I just like to add one brief comment to Gidon's.
Yeah.
With respect to the Jubilee. The Jubilee is probably the most extensive, difficult commandment that I can think of, because you have to start and get the entire society to agree 50 years in advance as to what will happen. Everyone has to agree that property will be measured in its worth by the amount of time between now and the Jubilee. And everyone has to agree in advance that property will be restored to the original owners in that 50 years. So it is the most fundamental societal transformational commandment that I've ever seen in the scripture. And then playing off that point, what is God trying to tell us through the Jubilee? I think when we look at these things, we look at the perspective, what is God doing in this relationship that Gidon is mentioning regarding Jew and non-Jew? There's something that God wants. Okay, there's something there's something happening. We can see it, and probably what he wants is not precisely fitting into the exactly Christian category of how we think it should go, or exactly the Orthodox Jewish category of how those dear folks think it should go. And I think there's a clue in the Jubilee. There's a clue from God in the Jubilee. What is the clue? Let me ask you a question. Is the Jubilee idea in Scripture an idea that is a Republican idea or a Democrat idea? Is it a conservative idea or a liberal idea? The answer is it's neither. It is an unusual hybrid. Go read it. And I'm saying that to the audience. Go look at it. Put your mind inside that, and you will see it is not all about personal responsibility and rugged individualism, but it is also not a free handout. It is not an enabling event. It is a beautiful hybrid, and I think that there's a lesson to us that when God is working to restore the split, there's been a great split between Jew and non-Jew over the last 2,000 years. When he's going to restore it, he's going to do something that is above and beyond what our normal buckets of ideas, and how it's going to fit will be. So there's something beautiful coming. Don't know what it is, but I'm happy to be part of the journey. It's just fascinating to see what's God up to.
I think that's exciting. And I think what we tend to forget is, all of these commandments that God gave are all about freedom. They're all about freedom. That is God's highest ideal, is freedom. I mean, look at Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? You are free to eat anything. There's only one thing you can't do, right? And that the restriction on the one thing actually demanded that they have free will. Okay, without that, they really wouldn't have had free will. You can eat anything you want, go for it. But there's one thing you can't do. Now you have to actually exercise your free will. And I think we forget that God is all about free will. And it's a collaboration with God, right? He created the dirt, right? Now you get to play in the sandbox, right? You get to do really all kinds of things. And you're free to do anything you want. You really are. But not everything is going to have a good outcome. All right? I mean, if you want to eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, okay, you're free to do it. I don't recommend it. But God, it's all about freedom. And so God has then given us his instructions on things that will lead to life, joy, peace, happiness, prosperity, etc. And we're then free to choose to follow them or not. And, I was thinking about, actually, I was having a conversation with a fellow pastor back around 2008 or 9. We were talking about the economic collapse, and he pointed out to me, he said, if we were to follow what God prescribed for us economically, that you release the debts, you have the Shemitah every 7 years, we would not have these these boom and bust cycles where people lose their shirt, because it would already be factored in. It would be built into our very economy. We wouldn't have this wild speculation. And I thought, it was really a new concept to me. I'm like, wow, that's really amazing. I hadn't thought about that. But then I started to look at all these different things, and all of these things are all about, as you said, kind of back to square one. It's an equalization. It's so that nobody can really take advantage of one person or another. And eventually it all goes back, and we all are back on that same playing field. So we don't have this gigantic disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, and so, Gidon, I like kind of press into this question about the Torah,
Yes.
because I really feel that Christianity in general has a very big chip on their shoulder. Again, when we have this basic core belief, at least, some Christians, maybe not all of them, but the ones that I have hung out with a lot, have had this idea that when he died, he took the Torah and he nailed it to the cross. I've heard that in sermons, and it was like fingernails on a chalkboard, if people remember what chalkboards are. But I know, way back in the day, right? But it's just that nasty sound. I'm like, ooh, that doesn't sound right. But that is a very, very typical popular theology, that he came to free us from the Torah, that is those commandments that God gave back at Sinai. So that's a very major split, and it's going to be hard to even go, to date if we have that much disparity between us. And so I would really appreciate if you could bring us up to speed. What is the Torah? Why is it important? Why should Christians not be afraid of this? In fact, why might they even want to embrace this to some extent?
Well, earlier in this program, you told me, you mentioned how Jesus was there at the giving of the Torah. You alluded, or even said very clearly, about the triune Godhead. Usually, my correspondents, the people that I dialogue with, Christians, they don't talk so much about the divinity of Christ. I don't challenge them on it. Don't ask for it. Don't tell. But what people often do describe Jesus as, I guess, perhaps his human tour here on this earth. Again, I'm barely a theologian, and certainly not a Christian theologian, but Jesus, Yeshua, was a Jew. He read the New Testament, which is, I sometimes call it the life and times of Jesus Christ. It's a story of a Jewish person in a Jewish state dealing with other Jews. It's all a Jewish story. So if you're really interested in knowing that man, then you want to learn as much as you can about him. And the only way to do that is learn the Old Testament, because when Jesus talked about the Bible, I can assure you he wasn't talking about not Galatians and not Revelation and not the Gospels. He was talking about the Old Testament, which we call the Tanakh, which is the Jewish Bible. In this day and age, if there ever were any Jewish sages or Jewish people throughout the thousands of years of animosity between Jews and Christians who said, keep that a secret, it's ours, that's passé completely, if it ever exists. I'm not even sure. There are some things that there are traditions like that. But today, ever since Gutenberg, not to mention the internet. It's all out there. It is clearly the Jewish people consider the Bible our inheritance. It is the story of the Jewish people. But if it is the story of the Jewish people, then it is the story of Jesus's people. So you're going to want to read it to try to figure him out. And that is, I think, the reason why many of our root source students come to us. I don't ask anybody, what are you doing here? I'm not, they came to learn. They love it. Many of them volunteer and say, now I understand this aspect of Jesus's life. You're able, if you understand, if you don't know nothing about Jesus except for some 10 verses that somebody told you this is what you got to know about Jesus, then you know nothing about Jesus. If you learn all about Jesus's life, then you're probably going to love him more.
So could you spell out for us just a couple, maybe one or two of those, light bulb moments, or those big things that Christians suddenly discover? They're like, oh my goodness, this helps me understand the person of Jesus so much better.
I think, just off the top of my head, I think that the fact that Hanukkah, for example, it's winter around here. The December holidays of the United States, besides Kwanzaa, are Christmas and Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the Jewish holiday, and I think that most of your viewers are familiar with it. But for those of them who might not know much more than it's the Jewish Christmas, Hanukkah means dedication, and it is a celebration of the rededication of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, in the time of the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans, which was about 200 years before the Common Era. And that was a holiday that was celebrated in Jesus' time. And it specifically says, I have it here somewhere, but the verse says, and it was at the dedication.
John 10:22.
So there you go. So if you read that in English, I hope that all of your viewers know that the Bible wasn't originally written in English. Either Bible.
But my viewers are very smart. They're savvy. Yeah, they know
that. So hey, Jesus observed Hanukkah, and the fact that there was an argument about whether picking up a corn husk, or I don't know what it was permitted or not. That's a big story that I hear a lot of people referring to. Well, that means that Jesus followed that he observed the Shabbat. So what is this Shabbat that he observed? Again, I don't know how many stories there are in the New Testament about Jesus and Shabbat, but this idea of plucking, what's the, it better than
he was plucking grain. Yeah, he was plucking grain.
He was plucking grain. So plucking grain is something that you shouldn't do on Shabbat. You should prepare your meals before Shabbat so that you can enjoy Shabbat in general. Again, if you are about to die from hunger, then most of the 613 commandments are put on pause so that you can live by them and not die by them. But that idea of plucking grain is just one of 39 categories of prohibitions on Shabbat. I only have a couple of seconds left, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but one can assume that these were well known in Jesus' time about how one should observe the Shabbat. And he grew up in a Sabbath observant house, of course. He was a Jewish person. So I want to learn about all of these 39 categories of prohibitions that I say we should follow, but I would suggest that Christians, I want to know what the Jews did and still do to this day. It's a miracle that this tradition continued until this day and is having a renaissance as well. So those you asked me for two examples. So those are two examples that I think that those are reasons for Christians to want to learn more about Judaism.
Well, and I think, what it does is it helps people to understand that Jesus was not against Sabbath. As you said, he was observing Sabbath. As I understand it, he was challenging some of the oral tradition, not all of it, mind you, but some of it. He was challenging the oral tradition and suggesting that some of the practices that the Pharisees and Sadducees, but by and large the Pharisees, because they were the ones actually taking the Bible seriously, but some of those practices that they were observing uh, maybe had gone beyond what God had said to do. And so, again, he was challenging some, he was endorsing others. And I think just one more thing is that I
Yeah.
think a lot of times Christians don't understand is that there were a lot of different flavors of Jews, just as there are today,
Exactly.
right? But back then, a lot of different Pharisees, right? There's 7 different kinds of Pharisees, and sometimes Jesus has nothing but praise for them, and sometimes he's like against them, right? And I think that is a context that is completely left out. If you only read the New Testament, then it's really hard to see that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Again, only in the last 100 years have biblical studies and the fascinating phenomenon of Jews and even Orthodox Jews studying the New Testament, studying the life and times of Jesus, figuring out what happened over there. Again, from my perspective, I think they're one of the most well-known, at least to me, scholars of Jesus. Was a professor by the name of David Flusser, who wrote a book called Jesus. And I think that, again, I didn't read it, but I read about it and I read parts of it. And I think that it is phenomenal that this is, that the idea of just coming to church for an hour or two on Sunday morning and listening to a sermon, you don't have to restrict yourselves to that anymore. Go and learn about Jesus. Go and learn about what he meant, what were his ideas. And it's just an amazing. Again, we don't teach this on on Root Source. We don't teach about Jesus on Root Source. We teach about the things that Jesus was teaching about. But I highly recommend that people don't wait. Just don't watch TV. Again, you were talking to your viewers. We're preaching to the choir, as they say.
Exactly. And just to let you know that my viewers are very in favor of this. They're really enjoying this. But let me just ask you one thing. We've kind of asked, what do Jews wish every Christian knew? Let me ask you. Let me put it the other way. Let's see. Actually, I forgot my own question. I'm sorry. That's pretty bad. But again,
like
I really think that. Well, I was going to kind of jump in on something about Torah, but I lost my train of thought, unfortunately, because I'm kind of managing the controls here as well. But I don't know. But Bob, what's been your experience? I mean,
yeah.
What is it? Okay, I kind of thought of my question. What is it that Christians do that turn Jews off about Jesus, or what is the presentation of Jesus? We can come back to that in a second, because Bob, I want to get your thought, but
Sure.
we'll come back to that in a second. So go ahead, Bob.
Well, okay. I was just going to make the brief comment that, having been a student on Root Source myself, I certainly find these concepts as enriching, my understanding and my belief. It certainly is not. It's only improved my love for Yeshua in the process of understanding the context in which he was living. Simple as that. I think one of the big things that I've seen just in interacting with Orthodox Jews over the last 2-3 years as part of this process, when Gidon and I came together decided to come together and try to build this Root Source thing, was just, like you said, we have taken faith away from the Jewish people as Christians. We have stereotyped Jews as observant, about trying to earn their way to the Father through works. And my experience in getting to know people is to see it's just amazing how much faith there is, how much focus there is in trying to understand and fit and I mean, even the fact that there's no temple for sacrifices. So it's the sacrifice of praise is the is the operative way in which Jews come before and confess sins every day and ask God to forgive them personally and corporately. Just many things. It's just a beautiful thing, and it just a lot more overlap and understanding than I've ever seen.
I'm glad you said that, because it's really important to understand that. I mean, there's some very godly people in Judaism and Christianity in general. Again, I'm kind of painting with big brush strokes here, but generally doesn't think that they are. That, in fact, I was so much into that idea that I years ago I was having these kind of regular debates with this anti-missionary person, and I said, you Jews are just doing the commandments to try to earn your way or earn favor with God, and the person quickly quipped, "No, we're not." I'm like, "Yes, you are," and "No, we're not." I said, "Yes, you are. You're just doing that to try to earn your way, earn your salvation." And the person said, "No, we do it because God said to." And at that moment, I was just like, I'm like, whoa, I had no response for that, because I had been taught that, we receive it by faith. It's all by grace. But the Jews are trying to, they're doing the commandments and trying to earn their salvation, And when that response came, I was just, I had no response to it. I had no comeback, because I thought, well, I can't really argue against that. If you're doing it because God said to, I can't tell you to not do it, because if God told you to do it, then you should do it, right? So I think that's really important for us to kind of just think about that and to redo our thinking about that. But Gidon, I wanted to ask you really one more question, and that is, what is maybe just kind of what's the biggest that you can think of doctrine or thing that we Christians are teaching that is the most offensive to Jews?
I'm not offended by anything people do when I'm not watching.
Well,
I remind you, I have teenage children.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I think what's important is that you have to just say, "You're you, I'm me. I am gonna try to have a normal relationship with you, not try to stick you into some box that I'm expecting you to be." Think about it. Put all the religion aside. You go to the supermarket, you get on a bus, you go to university, you're working you have a new colleague at work. If you would expect something of these people and dehumanize them, then that's the kind of relationship that you're going to have with them. So all we're asking is just don't expect anything from us. If you want to try to do something nice, and we're nice people, I highly recommend that you try to establish friendly relationships with nice people. Don't bother with the people who aren't nice. Stick away from them. But if you're gonna try to be nice to people, then just be nice, and little by little see what the boundaries are. That's it. So if you're saying what doctrine, what theology, I think we're already over time. We're not going to go over 2,000 years of dueling theologies over here. We're going to say, listen, I heard about something. Could you answer my question? Well, I'm going to be able to see from your body language if you're sincere in that question, or if you're just asking me about Isaiah 53 because you want to show me how, you see, that's what I mean. Come on. If you really want to know what how I understand it, then be open to hearing it. But preferably don't even ask about it. Let's find stuff that we don't have to, that isn't the flash points. Let's start with the stuff that we can both enjoy together. That's what I think.
The Jews that God is raising up in this work, from my perspective, Jews like Gidon, who represents a foundation stone, in a sense, for I think many Jews and the way that they could interact with Christians, non-Jews. The Jews that are being raised up by God are Jews that have the ability to push aside the offense that could be easily taken from theological differences. And similarly, I think that the Christians, or Yeshua followers, whatever, that God is raising up to connect, are also Christians that are willing to push aside the offense for not accepting, that one that we would die for our, that one Yeshua that we would follow to the ends of the earth. But Jews have their struggles as well. The things that they have to push aside to do this. So I think that's the first step, and I think that's what you're seeing with Gidon, and why you didn't get a crystal clear, specific theological answer.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you both. The Jewish people have impacted me significantly. When I decided to go to Israel to study at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, I kind of went there on faith, not really sure what to expect. I thought maybe I would just take out student loans to do that. And lo and behold, I received scholarships all 3 years that I was there. And I thought, who are these people that are giving me these scholarships, And I mean, I don't know to this day, just they were kind of in the general fund, from the Hebrew University, Friends of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I thought, well, isn't this incredible that, some Jew that doesn't know me is giving money, and I, a Christian that I don't believe in the Talmud or whatever, right? Especially back then, they were giving me money, right, to study, and they were underwriting my studies at the Hebrew University. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And so, that is stuck with me, that the generosity, the just the kindness, right? And it was an unspoken, unsung kind of generosity, right? I have not had a chance to thank those people personally, but whoever you are, wherever you are, I just want to thank you for sowing into my life, because it really made a huge difference. And I think what you said, Gidon, is really important. Let's not start with the flashpoints, but let's start with, what do we agree on? Let's have a discussion. And I think that really is something that is growing. I have a friend in Israel, David Necrutman, who is the director for the Center for the Christian Jewish Center for Understanding and Cooperation. Let's go with the title. And that's another organization, I guess, in a way similar to Root Source, that this is specifically designed to help, have Christians come to the land. Let's talk. Let's, get into some of those theologies. Let's talk about those things, right? But let's also show you what we think, and let's try to understand one another. And I'm just excited about that, because it really makes a difference. And a lot of times, as we've all learned in communication, that a lot of times we have miscommunication because we're talking past each other, we're not talking to each other, we're not listening, right? I mean, how many marriages have been dissolved because people were not listening, right? How many business deals have gone bad because people were not listening to each other? How many wars have been started because people were not listening to each other?
Everyone.
They were just, yeah, exactly. God, I'm guilty as anybody, right? So this is what we're trying to do, is to kind of bridge this gap. And so I'm very grateful. And as I said at the very beginning, I'm very, very grateful to the Jewish people as a whole over the last several thousand years for maintaining the oracles of God, as Paul puts it, that we're very grateful, right? Because without the Jewish people, where would the Hebrew be? Where would just the understanding that has been passed on? Without that, we would be very bankrupt without that stuff. So we're grateful. Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work. Gidon, thank you for being so courageous to, kind of hold hands here with us Christians, and show us around. To you're getting some grief from some of your Jewish neighbors, and what are you doing, right? But we appreciate it, and I think what you're doing the sowing that you're going to do is going to reap a harvest. All right. It may take a
Exactly.
little longer than we all expect, right? But it is going to reap a harvest, right? So what we sow is what we reap. That's a principle in the scripture. And when you sow to righteousness, when you sow generosity, when you sow kindness, you will reap those things later. And so we appreciate it. And I want to encourage everyone who is watching to do the same. All right. It doesn't mean we have to agree on every single theological point. That's, of course not, right? I mean, maybe someday, right? But it may not be the Jews who are the ones changing. Maybe we Christians are the ones who need to change some of our perspectives. Maybe we haven't quite understood what was being said. And, and if the Jews need to change, let God work about that, okay? But let's focus on what we can do with ourselves, because we can't change anybody else. I've discovered that after a number of years, right? I can't change anybody except me. I can only change me. And so I need to focus on me, and in a sense of my community, I can work on my community, but I can't change your community. And so that is what we can do to make a difference in the world, is start to focus on how can I be a better person, and I'll let God worry about you becoming a better person. So thank you guys. Thank you everyone for watching. Stay in the Word, okay? Read the whole thing, right? Start with Genesis, go through the Torah. Brilliant stuff in there. Meditate there on Leviticus 25 about setting people free. That is what God is into. It's about liberty, it's freedom, it's joy, and thank God for the Jubilee. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Thank you guys. Stay in the Word, everyone.
Amen.